So we're holding Halacha Basar B'Cholov Siman Tzadik Beis Daled. Siv Daled is a big seif, a big Ramah, and it touches on the concept of Hanan. So we'll go back to review a little bit of Siv Gimel because that is also somewhat involved with Hanan. Hanan, Chaticha Nasa Nevela, is a sugya, a whole sugya in itself, which as a result of it, there are many halachas, many details that pertain to similar situations, even though they're not Hanan. I call them similar situations that are an outgrowth, let's call it, of Hanan. Including, even though they're not exactly the same, including the whole idea of Efshel Esoichtoi, believe it or not, which is related and not related. Nevertheless, they're both dealt with more or less in the same sugya. And another concept called Isur Dovuk, which is an additional chumrah, which is also somewhat related to this concept of Hanan. So there's quite a few machlokes, quite a few scenarios, and we'll try to deal with each one of them. Just to review the main point of Hanan. Hanan basically says that meat and milk come together in the form of bishul, and therefore they become asr. Even though the meat absorbed a little bit of milk, nonetheless there's not enough in the meat to be mevatel the milk, and therefore the whole meat becomes asr. And this meat is not only asr to eat because of the Isur Basar B'Cholov. If it were to fall in another gdera, we would not only need shishim against the cholov now, with a gdera of meat, we would need shishim connected the whole piece of meat that has absorbed cholov. Because chaticha nasa nevela means that the whole chaticha has now become a nevela. And it's no longer enough for me to be mevatel just the Isur alone, as I would ordinarily in Hilchas Bitum, concerned about an Isur in the Gdera, and I know how much of an Isur fell in. It would be enough for me to just focus on the Isur. Well, here, the Isur is the formation of Basar B'Cholov, the combination of the two coming together, that forms the Isur. So that becomes something of a cheftzeh, of Isur, and now I have to reckon with the whole thing. I cannot only reckon with the milk, I have to reckon with the whole thing. So I need shishim against the whole piece. If I don't have shishim against the whole piece, then of course everything is asr. If I have shishim against that piece remains asr. So that piece remaining asr is from the din of Efshel Esoichtoi asr, and that is the way we hold it. It's a machlokes in the Gemara. And Efshel Esoichtoi we paskin is asr. Well, what does Efshel Esoichtoi say? Efshel Esoichtoi says that even though I would have loved for this piece that absorbed an isur to go through Hagala. Hagala is when I remove an isur from a keli, right? By hot water. I remove it, I extract it, it's no longer there. I would have expected and would have hoped that this piece of isur that once was heter, became asur, fell into another gdera, that perhaps at some point that piece would come back and be kosher again. After all, aren't we being mevatel through the large volume of yerek, vegetables, and liquid? Aren't we being mevatel somehow, that isur somehow? And the answer is no, not really. You're not really being mevatel it completely. And we explained that the Rashba says, in two places, either the isur does not come out somehow, or not all of it comes out, or I don't know how much came out. And because of that, I always will possibly have some isur left behind in the original piece. And therefore, Efshel Esoichtoi also, the concept of Efshel Esoichtoi, in other words, is it possible to extract it, to squeeze it out, is also, we don't say that. What do we mean we don't say it? We don't say it either like the Rashba says, not all of it comes out, in other words, it's not possible to say, or like the Ran explains, the reason we don't say it, because even if it were to be possible for you to get every molecule out, Efshel Esoichtoi also is a new halacha, that piece of meat has become asr, and it continues to be asr. It's a cheftzeh d'isur, as we explained. So that was the concept of Efshel Esoichtoi. Regardless of how we hold with Hanan, Efshel Esoichtoi is a halacha in itself regarding that particular piece. Whether we need shishim against the whole thing, whether we need shishim against the isur alone, that's a different idea. This piece will remain asur. Okay. Now, we understand the way Hanan works by Basar b'chalav. The way it works by Basar b'chalav is a unique chidush, and the chidush is that this piece now has become a chefza shel isur because it contains a combination of forbidden. Each one is heter by itself, but coming together they are aser. And this piece contains the combination of the chalav and the meat. So the question right now is, well, what would halacha say about shar isurim? In shar isurim, when you have a piece of heter meat that has absorbed an isur, do we say that that whole piece of meat becomes a chefza shel isur too? Do we say chanan b'shar isurim? A piece of meat that was cooked by mistake with a piece of nevela, and it absorbed tam of the nevela. Are we going to say now that this piece of meat, where there was no shishim, of course, the mevatel tam, now becomes aser, and if it ever falls in again, not only do I have the problem of efshel soichton, right now, do I need shishim against the whole piece, or can I have only shishim against the tam that it was bolea? I know exactly how much it was bolea. I remember, it was a little piece of meat that fell in. So I can calculate against that small piece of isser, or do I need to now calculate against the whole piece? That's the question of whether do we say chanan applies b'shar isurim too. Okay, and that's what we will talk about today. Does it apply everywhere else or not? And that's where you have quite a bit of machlokes and shitas in Tosfos itself too. But we need to understand a little bit the reasons for everything.
So maybe you could again formulate exactly Efshar l'sachto, exactly what is the difference?
Well, Efshar l'sachto is also pertains to that piece alone, without any connection, without any relevance to the rest of the Gdera. In other words, regardless of what happens to that piece, whether I have shishim against it or not, that piece will always remain aser.
We're talking about now sharis.
No, we're talking about your question is about Efshar l'sachto. Yeah, but your question was the gabe Efshar l'sachto.
The difference between to
right
and hanan in the case where a piece of
right. It makes no difference what it has absorbed. It has absorbed some isser, right? And even if the piece of meat absorbed milk, not even kol shekin if it absorbed.
But hanan would make a difference. That's why I'm trying to keep it uniform.
Right. So that's why I'm saying is that it wouldn't make a difference whether it's basar b'chalav or whether it's shar isurim legabe efshar l'soichdoi. A piece of meat having absorbed something that renders it treif cannot become not treif through schita, through bishul, through hagala, through the process of heat that apparently would, under normal circumstances, take some of the tam out. It just happens to be that it doesn't. It really doesn't. The problem is that, like the Rashba says, we don't know if any comes out, and if some came out, how much. Or the Ran says it makes no difference even if you got all of it out. It remains a chefza shel isur. Right, okay. One more time.
What's the nafkamina? I say on this piece of meat it's hanan b'shar isur, or I say on this piece of meat efshar l'sachto is aser b'shar isur. What's the difference between saying?
It's two separate. It has nothing to do with each other. There's a big machlokes by hanan b'shar isurim. Okay.
Coming to those that hold this hanan b'shar isur.
Right. We're going to come to that soon. And right now we just reviewed a little bit of the tam, of the hesberim, of why efshar l'sachto is aser. And all I said was that they're not necessarily related. You could hold efshar l'sachto is aser, like the Rashba says, okay? And you can hold chanan b'shar isurim is not a problem, like Rabbeinu Ephraim, which we're going to learn today.
Rabbeinu Ephraim holds the chanan b'shar isurim not a problem.
It's not a problem.
Or does he hold efshar l'sachto b'shar isurim?
He doesn't talk about that in that Tosfos. Yeah.
Well, what is his position?
I don't recall right now. Yeah. There is a connection between efshar l'sachto, a small connection between efshar l'sachto and Hanan in Rabbeinu Tam, who is a big fan of Tam Ki'ikar in as far as it applies in Kazais B'chdei Achilas Pras, which is a whole sugya in itself that we discussed when we were learning Hilchos Taaruvot, of if you have Kazais B'chdei Achilas Pras, what does that mean? That you have a certain amount of Isser within a certain amount of food that is going to be consumed in a certain amount of time. So technically here, in the kazayis b'chdei achilas pras, you could have Isser in every kazayis. Why? Because the whole idea behind Rabbeinu Tam's understanding of kazayis b'chdei achilas pras and Tam ke'ikar is that the heter becomes Isser. In the same way, Isser can become heter through bitul. Remember that? Isser can become heter. It's transformed into heter in a sense. Heter becomes Isser. If you have a certain amount of it, and you're eating a little bit of that amount, even though you're eating a little bit of this, a little bit of that, wherever there's a kazayis b'chdei achilas pras, you will be eating chas v'shalom, the Isser. So there's a question about that. Would everybody else who says Chanan, there is no Chanan b'shar isum, would they agree with Rabbeinu Tam that in the case of kazayis b'chdei achilas pras, there would be Chanan? In other words, there are such scenarios and there are such questions that are raised that perhaps in such a situation there would be some agreement. But if it would not be kazayis b'chdei achilas pras, in other words, you don't necessarily have the kazayis in that amount, that's where you would have the machlokes. So with Rabbeinu Tam, as we will see, it's a little bit more complicated how he holds and why he holds what he holds. But we'll go through it a little bit. We'll have to go through it slowly. Just again, before we go on with the Chanan, just a little bit of a review. The Mechaber finished off in Sif Gimel by telling us that anything that was cooked together, sheneso chaticha machmas acholov, that nases kol chaticha isur, and this Chanan bishlo im acheros, that you need now shishim levater kuloi, and that if you recognize it, you have to throw it out. You still have to throw it out. But if you don't recognize it, he tells us that kol chatichas asuros im chatichas isur royu leskabed. Remember that? So in a situation where you don't know which piece it is, and that piece did become Chanan, it's Basar b'chalav, you would have a problem here, because if the chaticha is ruyul iskabed, it's not batal afilu be'elef. So what do we understand from that? That if the chaticha was not ruyul iskabed, it was just a regular piece of meat. It was goulash meat. It's not ruyul iskabed. Then you wouldn't have to be concerned about it, because you would have roiv. You would have bitul b'roiv. So even though there is Chanan, right? You have shishim keneged the piece, but you don't know which piece it is. You just know you have shishim against it. They're all the same size, perhaps, but you don't recognize it. So Baruch Hashem, you have shishim keneged it. So you save the k'dera. Not only did you save it there, even the pieces of meat are bottle. Even the Chanan is bottle b'roiv. So the Mechaber is only strictly talking about chaticha ruyul iskabed. Now, chaticha ruyul iskabed, we mentioned that it's only asur if the isur is machmas atzmoi. If it has an isur below, it does not become a chaticha ruyul iskabed. In other words, it does not pose a problem of an isur or chaticha ruyul because it's an isur below. It has to be isur machmas atzmoi. So the question was, is basar b'chalav an isur machmas atzmoi? And we said yes, because that's how the isur is formed. The isur of basar b'chalav is formed by the two of them coming together. There's a machlokes later on if basar b'chalav is an isur below or not when it's touching other pieces without being cooked together. That's a separate machlokes. But otherwise, basar b'chalav is unique that the combination of the two form the isur. Okay, so now let's talk about Chanan b'shar isurim. So I'm going to read the Mechaber, then we'll review it. See if Dalet says, Lo omru chaticha atzma nases nebeila ela bebasar b'chalav. The Mechaber says that the only time we said Chanan is bebasar b'chalav. Aval lo b'shar isurim, not in the shar isurim. This is pretty much what many hold. Halacha l'maisa. Ela bebasar b'chalav. Why? Because basar b'chalav is unique. In other words, Chanan applies only to basar b'chalav. It's a unique issue. The combination of the two produces a new issue. Avalot b'shar isurim. What's an example of shar isurim? Can go on kazayis chaylev, fat, forbidden fat. Sheniv lo bechaticha, ve'im bo shishin levatlo, and we don't have shishin to be mevatel that chaylev. Ve'nesro, it became asur. Later on, somehow, chakach bishlo, you cooked it with others in macheros. Ein tzorich elo shishim. You only need 60 kedei kazayis chaylev. And if you have a shishin kedei tekasayis chelev, ve'az afilu chaticha atzmo chozeres liyus mutar, then even the piece that became aser becomes mutar. Oh, this last line is a big question mark. Now remember, we talked about this in Hilchos Taaruvot, so we're going to go back and talk again and again as to, wait a minute, mechaber, you're saying that that piece goes back to becoming mutar? Isn't that efshar l'soiftoy? Okay. So before we talk about the apparent stira in the mechaber, just to make it clear, Rabbeinu Tam is the one that holds that Hanan applies everywhere. In the Tosis there in the Gemara, Hanan applies in all Isurim. This concept is not just unique to Basar v'cholov. And he brings his rayas there. Rabbi Elyahu says that there's a good raya from that Rabbeinu Tam holds that it's the Raisa too. Anyway, Rabbeinu Ephraim is the one that says we don't say Hanan Bashar Isurim. How does the Mechaber paskin? Like Rabbeinu Ephraim. How does the Ramah paskin? Like Rabbeinu Tam, which we'll see later on. The Ramah holds that Hanan is pretty much applicable to other Isurim as well, but he makes a small little condition, small but important little condition. You remember that condition, Milan? Of Hanan Bashar Isurim according to the Ramah?
No.
Yeah. It has to be also an Isur Davul, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, that which we say that Hanan applies to Shar Isurim, the Ran says that particular din, if you hold like that, that's only the Rabbanan. That's also very important. Now, why would the Chachamim be goizer Hanan b'Shar Isurim? In other words, we're saying this to Rabbanan, we're saying that the Chachamim were goizer. It's not a Doraisa, even though there are some that would say it's a Doraisa, but basically we say it's a Rabbanan. What would be the reason? Otu Basar v'cholov. In other words, we say, let it be Hanan b'Shar Isurim because of it, the din is such in Basar v'cholov, we don't want to differentiate. We don't want people to make a mistake. And therefore, we want to make everything the same. A piece of heter meat became asar, however, regardless of how it became asar, it can become a Hanan, word that you will have to deal with. Whereas by Basar b'cholov itself, it's a din min haTorah. It's not a derabbanan. That it becomes a Hanan, it's an actual din min haTorah. And I saw that this is what the Shach here pretty much writes, b'shem ha'ogor and the Pri Megadim, that the Shar Isurim Hanan is a derabbanan. Even though it does appear, if you read through the Sugya, read through the Gemara, it does appear that the whole machlokes here, of whether it applies b'Shar Isurim, could be a machlokes Amorayan too. Depends how you learn that Gemara. What's interesting, however, is if we say that it's a derabbanan, so the Pri Megadim brings down the following scenario. What happens if you have a suffix Hanan? Well, it depends on what kind of a suffix we're talking about. If it's a suffix because it was nishpach, remember the famous cases of nishpach we had in Taaruvot, that before you were able to get to the pot, it all spilled over. And you don't really know how much you have. Did you have shishim or not? So that's a suffix Hanan. So that would be a Sveika D'Rabbanan Lekula. It's a D'Rabbanan, and that would be a Sveika D'Rabbanan Lekula. But the Pri Megadim adds, if there was a suffix on the Chaticha itself, if there was Samach, if there was Shishim in it against the Isur, then it's a Sveika D'Oraisa. If I have a suffix Legabe the piece itself, because this is, remember, it's Min B'She'eno Minoyo, you have Tam, so it's a D'Oraisa, it's a Sveika D'Oraisa. If I had a suffix Legabe the piece itself, then that would have been a suffix D'Oraisa. If later on that piece got cooked, in a Kedera where we know for sure there wasn't Shishim, everything would be Asr. And he says it's like a din, it's like a suffix din Torah that nisgalgel le'isur l'suffix to a D'Rabbanan. Because you started off with a suffix D'Oraisa. Even though now you end up having a suffix D'Rabbanan, but you still had a suffix D'Oraisa to begin with. That would be different. So depending what your suffix is, but that's a very interesting point, that if it would be a real suffix concerning the whole mixture, not concerning the piece, it's a suffix D'Rabbanan, suffix D'Rabbanan Lekula. So it's important for us to note that even if we're machmir on Hanan b'Shar Isurim, if you have a suffix like that, it's a suffix D'Rabbanan. That's a very interesting point. All right, what about the Mechaber? So the Mechaber told us a very important din, that he holds there's no Hanan b'Shar Isurim. But he adds, therefore, if you have shishim keneged the original iser, the original chalev that was nivla, you save the pot, and the original piece is mutter too. What? He didn't say that in Siman Kuv Vav. Let's read Kuv Vav. In Kuv Vav he says clearly, you have shishim keneged the iser balua, mutter ma shebagdira, aval hachaticha atzmo asura, lefisha iser shebo ein niflo b'meno legamre, which is pretty much the lashon of the Rashba in one place. Wow, I mean, this is really black and white. Pretty much the same halacha here and there. Chaticha shebala iser. If you absorb the iser, it's not basar b'chalav. Eino seres elo lefi cheshbon. You only have to know how much it has. Fine. So he holds chanan b'shar yisurim is not a problem. You can combine, by the way, you can combine the heter, because there's no chanan, right? You can combine the piece of heter that has a belia. You can use it in trying to figure out if you have shishim. You save the pot, but he says here the chaticha is also, and here he says the chatira goes back to liyos muteres. Everybody who likes steeras, some people love steeras. There's a contradiction. I don't believe that the Mechaber has contradictions. I never believed he has. I think there's always some differences. There's always some chilukim. He always explains himself. If he caught it himself in the Beis Yosef, he sometimes explains the minor difference. The Vilna Gaon doesn't seem to have a problem with steers. He says it's not a big deal. We find it in Hilchos Muktzeh. He said the Mechaber says one thing here, one thing there. And for whatever reason, he was machmir here. You could be machmir. And that's what the Gra says here too. The Gra says don't be too surprised by this. It's possible. Why after all does he do it? Well, simple. The Gra says here in Hilchos Basar b'chalav, he's quoting the Torah. He follows the Torah, and when he talks about the Isser of Efshar L'Seichta later on, he basically passes like the Rashba. So here the halacha, the whole halacha is being quoted from the Torah. So he says basically what the Torah says, that there's no chanan b'shar yisurim, that even that piece becomes mutter if there's shishim. But as far as the efshar l'serta, which is a halacha that he elaborates perhaps a little bit more in Siman Kuv Vav in Taaruvot, there he passes like the Rashba. And the Rashba says efshar l'serta is also. So he's telling us that piece will remain also. So that's the Gra.
With l'chayra, according to this halacha, will eat. One goes according to that halacha, and six will not eat with him.
Yeah. Unless you learn the shach, and unless you learn the crazy flacy. Then you begin to get an idea that the Mechaber is not just saying different, giving totally opposite opinions about the same scenario. There must be different scenarios. Yeah, and that's the way the Fianis I also think that the shach or the crazy flacy pretty much are on target over here. I mean, not to minimize the Vilna Gaon, but yeah, Vilna Gaon is right too. He is quoting the Torah here. But you're right. Why would he give us halacha l'maisa, something different there and there? It's halacha l'maisa. Right. Right, exactly.
Does he in the base yet all give any hints of halacha?
Not in this case so much, but in by Kovush he does. Yeah, I have to review it again. I didn't get to it. Didn't have time to go through it. I wanted to go through the Aruch HaShulchan too. There's a lot of svarim sometimes that it's good to go through because they all sometimes add a little bit more information.
Typically a great
Sure. But you need a lot of time to cover to cover all of these.
That's very important.
Right. So we try to go through the basics.
The same problem, is it?
Yeah. We try to cover the basics to get a little bit of some to see what exactly is going on. Go through the Gemara is always a good idea. If you learn the Gemara, you're learning the Makor, the source, the Sugya, of where it all began. The Rashi, the Mishnah, then the Gemara. And sometimes Rashi is also a puzzle. How does Rashi hold? Rashi, a very major commentary. But once we understand the Rashi, the Tosos, the Rosh, the Ran, we go on to the other Rishonim, until you get to the Mechaber, who really basically takes everything and puts it together, either like the Rambam, or like the Rif, or like the Rosh. So it's sometimes difficult to go through the whole maze and try to sort things out, why everyone holds what they do. But at the end, it comes down to basically, 2 or 3 shittas, that's all, usually. Sometimes you have more. more than that. Especially when you talk about giving a hesber, a tam for something. But you could also have 3 halachas, not 1, 2, 3. 3 shitas and 3 halachas, and it could become a little bit complex. But that's what halacha is all about. Halacha is trying to resolve. Well, actually, not the word resolve is not a good word. It's trying to come up with the practical halacha lemaisa based on the consensus. Based on the consensus. Practical halacha lemaisa based on the consensus. Because they're all right. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, they're all right. But the practical halacha lemaisa that we can apply according to the consensus. And sometimes it's not necessarily a consensus per se, because it depends if you're learning a Rishon. Well, the Rishon is his own consensus. But the Mechaber has had to look at all of them, or the majority of them, to reach a consensus, because he's writing this for all of Am Yisrael. And even then, it wasn't enough. The Ramah had to add his little comments. You only went with them, I go with them. Yeah, so it's what's nice about this is that even though sometimes the Mechaber and the Ramah take or adapt different shitas, they're both right. I tell everybody, they're both right. It's just that it was like with Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. How could they both be right? Yes, they're both right in understanding what the halacha can be, not should be, can be. But only one can be halacha lemaisa. That's the thing. Even though they're both true and they're both acceptable, only one can be applied at any given time. So some say Beis Hillel is applied now, Beis Shammai when Mashiach will come. How could that be? Because they're both real, they're both true, they're both correct. In how they see the halacha.
What I missed then is that, and what exactly is the criteria which you apply if both are right?
One more time?
What is the criteria by which you determine which one to apply both are right? Normally, it seems to would be, generally speaking, with respect to all sorts of in life, that if you have several options, identify which is the right option. Go with that.
Yeah, but not
now,
in this
if all
case.
of them are right, what is your criterion to determine which you apply?
Yeah, many times the criterion is the consensus, the roiv rishonim. That's usually the case. There is a prach here, there's a big chodesh over here that says something completely different than everybody else, and the Mikvaot says, don't even rely on that, even behefse meruba. Don't even rely on that. Right? Maybe we'll cover it today or next time. Because there's a consensus. So we're not going to go with the minority opinion. But there are other criterion too, and sometimes we use that in a hefse meruba situation, the other criterion that says, yes, you could use or rely on this because we have 2 or 3 rishonim that also support that shita. In any event, it's also a matter of Kabbalah meaning how they received it. There was what was understood by the Mechaber, by his Rebbeim, the generations before, to be more or less the shita, the derech or the maskana of the Gemara. Sometimes there's no maskana in the Gemara. So what was the derech? What did the Gaonim, who basically gave over to us the Gemara, how did they finalize it, or what did they write? And then you have situations which arose later on that are not explicitly written in the Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, Rishonim, that the Achronim have to deal with. What ifs, all kinds of what ifs, that are gray areas sometimes that we have to deal with. That's what Psak Halacha is all about. Psak is trying to take a parent scenario, and apply what we know to that situation, and it's not always easy. There are some examples here too. If we have time, we'll get into that, of how to resolve all kinds of complicated situations based on the principles that we are learning now. All right. So that was the grow. What does the Shach do with the Mechaber? The Shach says that here we're talking about a chaticha she'ena ruya liskabed. All right. So since it's a chaticha she'ena ruya liskabed, what's the problem? I don't recognize it, and therefore it's batal. Even though he himself has a hard time with this Mechaber, and he tries to push it through. In other words, he's not necessarily 100% satisfied with that, but he says that's the only thing that would make sense to him. That the Mechaber is talking in Sif Daled with a piece that is not Ru'ul Iskabed, and you don't recognize it. Obviously, if you recognize it, it would remain also just like it is there in Siman Kuvav. So, It's not Rudas Kabbat, it's Batal, I don't recognize it. That's why it goes back to becoming Mutter. That's Pshat. Pshat is that it was Batal. In other words, once you have Shishim, even that piece goes back to being Lios Muteres. And therefore, you can't recognize it. But you
really,
see why it's a little bit doichek? It's a little bit of a doichek.
That's what I was going to say, because normally you can't recognize it in a nation why you can of the food in front of you, even though you know there is an issur.
Even if there is an issur.
But here he told us it's muteret.
Right.
So by muteret you don't need it, it's not reversible.
Right. Yeah. But that's what the Shach, you're right, and that's the Shach is pretty much saying it in those words, that it's maybe not the best answer, but that is exactly what is happening over here. You don't recognize Nachaticha Rulas Kabbat, and if you have Shishim, everything is mutter, even that piece. Well, if I don't recognize it, yeah. Okay, but I think the Kreis place he adds a little bit of spice to this Mechaber. The Kreis place he says that here the Chaticha that we're talking about was Belea from its own min, its own type. And therefore it's min b'minoi. It's not an Isser min Torah, therefore in the end. And therefore the Mechaber is Mekel over here. In Kuf Vav it's talking about that he was Belea an Isser of Eino minoi. Then there's a Tam, and there's an Isur min Torah, and he's machmir like the Rashba. Okay, that is a little bit acceptable too, because once you hold that it's talking about an Isur of Minoi, and the whole thing is at the Rabbanan anyway, then why should we be machmir and Efshel Seichtoi? Do we need to be machmir? No. So that's a very interesting point, that even if you would recognize that it would be mutter then, if it's min b'minoi. If the whole Isser is a min b'minoi, because the whole thing is a D'Rabbanan anyway. And the Efshel Soiftoi, maybe it wouldn't apply here.
But then why does it becoming...
Well, with D'Rabbanan, right? We need Shishim over here. So the whole thing is a D'Rabbanan. Yeah. So the crazy place he wants to say, but basically, if it's a whole thing is a D'Rabbanan, he's making over here, l'chatchila. He says it's not going to be a problem. We just wish he would say it, that it would be clear, but that's the way the crazy place is. So we have several explanations.
Clearly, the language of the Mechaber does not imply that he's talking about the case.
Right, you're right.
He seems to be talking about the whole case.
Right. Yeah, that's why the Gra says, listen guys, don't make me pull him over here. Here he's quoting the Torah, and there he passes like the Rashba. But, I very much like what you said. This is halacha l'maisa. Why would you say two different halachas?
And he's not commenting.
He's not commenting, yeah.
Right, it sounds like he's...
Yeah. But anyway, the point here is that here he is talking about Hanan. Over there, he's talking about a little bit about Hanan too, but he's a little bit more of an emphasis on the Chumrah of Efshel Seichtoi. Here,
rather you mentioned maybe this.
Yeah.
Could be that the Gra is right.
Yeah.
Here he's quoting the Torah.
Right.
There he's following the Rashba.
Right.
We still need to understand why here he decides to quote the Torah, and so there he decides to follow the Rashba.
Right.
He has to have a reason for that too.
Yeah. The way I saw it was that in Kuf Vav he really got into the Isser of Efshel Seichtoi. In other words, he really elaborates on that, and even though he talks about Hilchas Taaruvot and Bittul, that you need Shishim, and indirectly we understand that he holds Chanan B'Shar Yisurim is not a problem, because he says the piece of heter that was Belag is starf also to be Mevatel. He basically talks about what to do with that Chaticha, because later on he says Masha'inkim B'Dover HaNivlal V'Nimoach, things that are soft, liquid, like blood. He says everything eventually becomes mutter, because liquid eventually will dissipate, is that the word? Will basically do away with the tam. And with the chaticha, where it's yovesh, you always may have something left in there. Whereas with the liquid, it will disappear. So there he does make a big differentiation between the various kinds of isurim. Here he doesn't really talk about it, he just talks about the Hanan part. And he tells us, listen, the Bishar isurim, you don't have that problem of Hanan. And therefore, you don't even have to worry about the original piece either. Now, we said before that, hey, those are two separate concepts, Efshel Seichtoi and Hanan. So that's the question. Why does he tell us you don't have to worry about that piece? Obviously, either you say like the crazy flacy that it's all of the Rabbanon here, everything else is a Rabbanon. But not everything else is the Rabbanon. In other words, even if it's an Iser D'Oraisa, but it's a Min B'mino, it's a Rabbanon situation, or you learn like the Shach. It's not. I didn't say it was easy. The Mechaber does appear to say two opposing halachas, but there he's more focused on the Iser L'Soichtoi, much more than over here.
If you look at the Gra,
yeah,
it says something. I'm wondering what
yeah.
It says Tetzai.
Yeah.
What's that? The Ein Vav.
No, he explains the law of Rina and Efshel Asefta B'Shari Surim.
So he's explaining the Mechaber.
Yeah.
So he's saying.
V'hu medivre atur.
V'hu medivre atur kan v'chen chalak al harashba b'sim kufav. Who's chalak al harashba? He says, and so he also attacks the harashba on kufav. Chalak al harashba.
I'm sorry, the tour. Yeah. Yeah.
You could understand the guy that
right.
The Mechaber was one.
Right. אבל הרשב"א ושולחן ערוך שם כוסו דחתיכס אסור אפשר לסכתו אסור בכל איסון וחילק בין דוברה נבלע. Okay, לא קשה מהם. All right. Yeah. But
apparently he's saying here on the Mechaber, at least the Rai is saying on the Mechaber, דלא אמנינן אפשר לסכתו אסור בשאר איסורים. He seems to be saying the Mechaber is holding that we don't say אפשר לסכתו אסור בשאר איסורים. It's not making a totally on the Chanan, just saying the Gra.
Yeah, but that's the tour. Yeah. We don't say Efshel Asur.
He's explaining here the Mechaber, and then he goes on to say the
V'hu medivre atur. Obviously, where does he take that from?
Right, but he's still giving the
sure.
position.
That's the question.
On Efshar L'Sachto.
Right, that was the question here.
He's just telling you what his source is, but he's not saying that just means to be quoting something.
Yeah.
So what does the Gemara see over there?
Yeah. No. I mean, he points to the question here. So, however you want to explain it, you have the various explanations. The Gra seems to say that here it's only the Tur, and over there it's the Halacha L'Maisa the Rashba. Efshel L'Sechta is Osir. But if the crazy place is right, everybody would agree with him. Well, I shouldn't say everybody would. It could be the Mechaber would easily agree with that, because if the whole thing is at the Rabbanan, then we don't have to be Machmer on Efshel L'Sechta either.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
the question is if that's what he meant. That's all it meant. But if that's what he meant, it would make sense that the Mechaber would go along with that and be Mekel over here and be Machmir over there. All right. Anyway, let's go on. All right. So we had a Machlokes by Chanan b'Shar Isur. What about Chanan in a Derabanan? If the Isur is a Derabanan. Also Machlokes Rishonim. Rashba and in the Sefer Isur V'Heta they write that even in an Isur Derabanan, Chanan applies. And if you look at the Shach and Pei Zayin, he explains, I think, pretty much the same thing. But if you look at the Rambam in Macholas Asuras, you see no. If you have a situation where milk fell into chicken, and there was not a 60 against the milk, and it became temporarily asur, he actually tells you, go ahead and add some more chicken to be mevatel the tam. And how much shishin? Keneged the chalav, not keneged the chicken. So we see that he holds there's no chanan in an Isur D'Rabbanan situation. And I think this was the prach. This is the prach that I was telling you, that the prach wants to say that the Rambam would hold that even in a Basar B'Chalav D'Rabbanan, the din would be like that. In other words, don't only say that there's no chanan in general, by Isurim D'Rabbanan. The Rambam would hold there's no chanan even in a Basar B'Chalav D'Rabbanan. You know how we have sometimes Basar B'Chalav that is only Asur D'Rabbanan, but not D'Oraisa, right? Like with Chaya. Remember that? That it's not a real typical Basar B'Chalav D'Oraisa, but it's still Asur D'Rabbanan. So the Pri Chodesh wants to say that the Rambam would hold there's no chanan. Not only is there no chanan B'Isurim D'Rabbanan, even in Basar B'Chalav D'Rabbanan. So that I think it was this Pri Chodesh or maybe another one, where we don't go by that. I mean, even if it would be a hefsem meruba, even if it would be a suffix, even if it would be a hefsem meruba, we wouldn't rely. I think we don't rely on that. I have to check it again. It could be this Pri Chodesh or another Pri Chodesh. Anyway, next concept. I think. Let me see here. Should we read the Ramah first? Let's read a little bit of the Ramah, not the whole thing, just maybe a little bit. V'yesh omer damril b'kol ha'isurim chaticha nases nevela. Toises, the Smag, the Mordechai. V'chen aminig poshet ve'en shanois. That's the minhag, that's the halacha that we hold chanan even in Shar Isurim. B'dafka, this is an important point, dafka im ha'isur dovuk b'chatichas heter. Dafka if the isur is dovuk in the chatichas heter, or shachaticha kulo chutz l'roitev. Or, in other words, either, the Ramah says, in order for it to be chanan b'Shar Isurim, it has to be either, how does it become chanan? Either that the isur is dovuk, it's attached to the heter, or shachaticha kulo, all of it is chutz l'roitev, v'nofal aleo isur. Aval in mixes a chaticha, if a little bit of the chaticha is inside the roitev, ve'ena isur dovuk bo, and it's not attached to it, lo aminu chaticha nases nevela, and therefore you don't say it. Umitztaref kol akdera levatal isur, you can use the whole kdera to mevatal the isur. V'kol mokom yesh la'achmin le'esor isur chaticha, you should be machmin not to eat that chaticha. V'chol ze b'shar isurim. Aval b'basar b'cholav, afal pi she'ena isur dovuk, even though basar b'cholav it's not exactly attached, or mixes a chaticha toich roitev, and it's inside the roitev a little bit, you still say aminu chaticha nases nevela. Okay, till here. So what's the Ramah telling us? The Ramah is introducing the Isur Dovuk situation. And what is he telling us? The Chanan can become Chanan only if the Isur Dovuk, only if the Isur is attached, or similarly, if the piece of heter meat is outside the roitev. Now what's happening? What's the common denominator of outside of roitev or Isur Dovuk? They must be similar. They must do the same. They must have the same effect on the basar heter. What's the effect? If you have a piece of meat sticking out of the roitev, or if you have Isur Dovuk, that means the Isur is attached, the Ramah is basically going like Rashi. Rashi says, that's where the Isur Dovuk is taken from, this whole idea, that there are times, there are situations where a piece of meat, a particular piece of meat, will absorb faster than the rest of the gdera. Why? Because of the way it is. Either it's dovuk, and you know when something is dovuk to the heter, that heter is going to get more isur and faster than the rest of the gdera. In a normal situation, when things are mixed all together in the roitev, the tam is spread all over pretty much equally. Pretty much equally. So you have shishim connected to the tam, you don't have to worry about one piece getting more than the other. It's all mixed. But when you have a isur dovuk, then it's going to get more. Or when it's outside the roitev, it's going to get first before it's mixed in. So it's having the chance to absorb more of the isur right away before it gets to the rest of the gdera. If that's the case, then of course if there was no shishin keneged the isur, then we say chanan. Whereas if it was in the gdera, or it was not an isur dovuk, it could have easily spread out evenly everywhere, and it would not necessarily have so much isur for it to become chanan. In other words, we wouldn't be machmer so much to say chanan b'shar isurim.
Now this is independent of whether you say Shabbos Sabta Asur or not.
Right.
Right,
we're talking about chanan. And the Ramah says we have to still be machmer legabetat chaticha too. Yeah. No, that's the next halacha. We'll be talking in the Ramah what happens in liquids. Do we say chanan by lach by lach? It's a Rashban, and we won't get to it today, but we'll get to that's the second half of the Ramah. Do we say chanan by kalim? Right? Yeah. Which we learned a little bit about that in the Taaruvot.
As a matter is a situation when a drop of milk falls on the apple.
Yeah. So the Meforshim learned that
right. That's what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about. Yeah. So briefly, the Meforshim explain here that Isur Dovuk is a chumrah. You know, the concept of Isur Dovuk is a chumrah nosefet. It's an additional chumrah. Because typically chanan, the chaticha has become already asur before. In a typical chanan situation, how does something become chanan? It became asur. It just became asur in a certain pot, and now it's being introduced into another pot. But here, what are we saying here? Here we're saying that in this one pot, not two pots, a chaticha can become a chanan. You see what I mean? The Ramah is telling us that's the only time I say chanan. You have to have this kind of a situation, which is interesting. But in reality, what's the typical chanan? The typical chanan does not involve an isur dovuk. The typical chanan involves that a piece of meat has become asur because there was no shish against it. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Like I say, sir, right? And now I put it back into another gdera. But what if it's all happening at one time, and you have an Isser Davuk at one time, one gdera? Not that the piece became Asr, it became Hanan. Now, it's becoming now.
Are we talking right now, Shah?
Yeah. Here there's a Chidush. What's the Chidush here? That even if you have Shishim Keneged the Isser, in this one gdera, what's the Chidush? But it's an Isser Davuk. That's what the Ramah is being Mechadash here. It's an Isser Davuk.
In other words, there is a situation in which the Isser affects either Davuk or
right,
where the rest of the pot cannot yet participate in being the battle view.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea here.
Right. Because typically Hanan is what? Either it was always Chutz L'Roitev, right? Or it was cooked by itself and there was not Shishim Keneged the Isser. So that piece became a Hanan. Here the Chiddush is where you have one Kdera, all the pieces are being cooked together. It's not Chutz L'Roitev necessarily, but it's an Isser Davuk.
So your problem is with the Davuk.
Yeah. Because if it's Chutz L'Roitev, I mean, I understand that.
But there are explanations that kind of marry the two ideas. Maybe because it's Davuk.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It can happen that it will be isolated from the rest.
Well, it's Boleya faster. That's what the Rashi says. That's one.
But there's
right. There's other reasons, true. So one reason is what Rashi says, to be saying, that if the Chatichas Basar, Rashi basically talks about a situation where Chatichas Basar was close, the Tzidoi Shela Isur was mamish close to the Tzidoi Shela Isur, then perhaps the Isur gave Tam first into that Basar that was closest to it. And therefore Ibnas is Nevela. So that's the Rashi. The Rashi that basically says that piece that was closest to it, or Davuk, as he's the Ramah is saying, absorbed more, or first, before the other ones. Another Hesber, the Smak, in the Isur Beheter, they have a chashash. They have a chashash that maybe it was for a moment outside the Roitev. Lerega, they say. Maybe if Lerega it was outside the Roga, and then it was Boleya more than the rest of them. By the way, there's another situation that we briefly talked about in Taaruvot. There's a chashash, they poured out everything else and it remained by itself at the end. Remember that one? It remained by itself and it absorbed then. But at that time there was no shishim against it. That's also another possibility. So that's what the Smak is concerned about. Not so much that it's Boleya faster, but that it could have been outside the Reuter. It could have been in a situation where it was by itself. Okay. The Taz brings down the nafkaminas between these. The Taz says, what would be the difference between these two ways of understanding Isur Davuk? So he said, according to the Smak, we would be machmir in an Isur Torah. But in an Isur D'Rabbanan, we wouldn't be concerned, maybe it was outside the Roitev temporarily. In an Isur D'Rabbanan, we would not be that choishesh. Only in the Basar B'chalav, of course, we would be choishesh, because it's in the Torah. So, according to the Smak, you would only be machmir in an Isur Torah. According to Rashi, that it's mamish boleya a lot more because it's Isur Davuk. The difference would be that Rashi would only apply to a real Isur Davuk. What if you would have a sheretz, a unclean bug, a bug, in the head of a fish? If you were to find a bug in the head of a fish, that would be called an Isur Davuk according to Rashi, because it's not Davuk to the head. And the Reuter, that's what they explain. This is not my...
You know, I'm smiling.
Yeah, why?
I don't think there are too many right now. It's
right.
Time of the heat, spending their time wondering about bugs in the hedge.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a very special crowd here.
Yeah. No, but that's the one example, one nafkamina that he says. That the sheretz found in the head, being cooked, but you have Reuter going all over the place. Right. So it's not double.
It's not double.
So that example would not be a good example according to Rashi. But to the Smak, it would be a problem. Because if you have a sheretz in the head of a fish, and the old chashash was that it was outside of the roitev, it was outside of the liquid momentarily, that means it could have become usher. It's not being mixed with everything. See, so there would be a little bit of a difference between how you explain the problems or the concerns with Isur Davuk.
Now we are assuming the bug is not. Why aren't we saying it's a brie that would answer the whole pot anyway? It doesn't answer the whole pot.
No, we're not considering. Well, it's first the fish. The fish is the problem first. Yeah.
Well, I have a brie. No. Yeah. So if the brie is in the head of a fish, it's not a.
No, it's still a bria.
So it would answer everything.
No, but we're going to...
Because with the beria complete...
Right, no, but we're not going to eat the beria. We're going to remove the beria. The beria is not the problem.
If you know that it's there.
Yeah, you know it's there. You saw it, yeah. Anyway, the Chavas Das says the Isur Davuk only applies, the way he understands it, is to something which is also betoilada. In other words, it was, from the very beginning, it was attached. Not that it became attached later on. Let's say something became attached later on to this piece of meat through the cooking process. It got stuck to it.
So
that would not be...
According to Rashi, would be
the way he understands it, yeah.
Rashi,
it would have to be from the very beginning.
But until the smackets would be.
Right, could be. You're right.
But with the bug in the head of the fish, that yavish with yavish?
Well, there is liquid there.
Yeah, but they get yavish.
Yeah, but you have an Isur beer. Oh, yeah, but it's still, the problem is the tam, unless it's tam lefgam. Yeah, we'd have to check it out to see exactly what the concern is. But these are just nafkaminas between the various tamim. Right, so that's the Chavas Das, that it would have to be there from the beginning. Now this is a little bit of a concern. You know when this could be a concern? This could be a concern with a chicken that mistakenly was cooked with its heart. The only reason I told you all of this is because this is the real scenario concerns that. A chicken that was cooked with its heart. The good news is, Mechaber says in Hilchas Melicha like this: En of shelo yeh bo shishim keneged liboy. There's no chicken that will not have 60 against its heart.
That will not have?
Yeah, they all do. Chicken, if you have the entire chicken, unless you're missing the head and the legs and you're going to have shishim keneged the heart. That's the good news. Now, what does he tell us here? The Mechaber adds, "Umuter afilu hu davuk ba'of." Even though sometimes when you buy the chicken, there's pieces inside in the bag or loose. Even if the heart is still attached to the chicken. The Ramah says on that, the kol sheyesh bo shishim afilu en bo arosh v'raglayim atachton, even doesn't have the head or the feet, it's usually going to be okay. L'chen im haguf sholem, hakol mutar. V'im ein sholem, and there's no shishim neged alev hadovak ba'of, yesh omrim de chaticha nases nevela. If that heart full of blood, remember that's the problem with the heart here, full of blood, the chaticha nases nevela, what you need shishim b'gder keneged kol ha'oif. V'chen noegin, v'afilu yiko shishim b'gder ha'oif osor, still oil ve'en bo shishim neged alev hadovak bo.
But this was under that is divided up, and therefore the heart is attached to it that does not have 60 against the heart.
One more time, what?
The last scenario you described by the
right.
Ramah, it was the Ramah, no?
Right.
So the assumption was that the chicken had been cut up, and chicken will not have 60 against the heart.
Oh, if it doesn't, then that's right.
But in that case, why do I need 60 chicken? The parts of the chicken that are cut away are not double because they're not attached.
Yeah, but they're not being cooked right now. We're talking about only...
I only need 60 chicken that has the heart.
Right, yeah. That's
so why
all...
do I need 60 against...
No. It's only the chicken that's being cooked right now. Yeah, only that part. Yeah.
Has the heart attached.
Yeah. So anyway, that would be the concern. That would be the question. And that would be a chumrah. That would be a question in a derabana or not. If you would say Isur Davuk, if that would apply. If you say that it absorbs more and therefore it affects the entire chicken, is that a concern? Okay, we'll see that. Maybe perhaps we'll get into that a little bit more. But that is a scenario that concerns the Isur Davuk, and I felt that I should bring it up right now. There's also additional questions as to what to do if you have more Isur than Heter. We learned about that in Hilchos Taaruvot. Just like Isur becomes Heter through Bittul, does Heter become Isur through Bittul? If you have much more Isur than Heter. Because the whole question was about Chanan b'Shar Isurim. So is it possible that everybody would agree, and apparently they would, I think, that if you had more Isur than Heter, situation where there was more Isser than Heter, which is not your typical, right? Here we're talking about situations where we have more Heter than Isser, just a question of how much. Do we have Shishin? Do we have Roiv? But in a scenario where you would have more Isser than Heter, then the Heter would become Isser and you would have Hanan. So the question is that perhaps Rabbeinu Ephraim would agree to that too. When does he say that there's no Hanan B'Shar Yisum? Only when there's more Heter than Isser. But in the event where you had more Isser than Heter, then everything becomes like Isser. Then it would be Hanan, possibly. These are some of the questions that are raised in the Sugya of Hanan, with B'Shar Yisurim. With Hashem, later on in the Ramah, we will see the additional cases of Lach B'Lach. In other words, what do we do in the situation where you have liquid, as opposed to, do we say Hanan on that too or not? On that, of course, is a Machlokes. With Hashem, we'll get to it next time. Okay.